Okay, so today I'd like to explore the whole religion versus science debate. Right at the beginning, let me tell you, I don't think this debate should exist in the first place. It's like debating between apples and oranges, or Japanese apples and American apples. They're both apples, they both have their value, they're both real, they both exist in this world. And if contaminated, both the Japanese and the American apple will make you sick, may even kill you if it has been contaminated in some way. So, religion and science, what are these two entities and how are they different? And why should we not be comparing one with the other, right? Well, to start off, what is science? Science is a method of investigating the natural world in which we exist. Science is a method of investigating the natural world in which we exist, which is evidence-based. So science is an evidence-based method of studying the natural world. And science is a wonderful thing because, gosh, life is so much better with science, Life is impossible without science, but, well, let's not have that chip on our shoulder and let's not think that just because we're firing rockets that go to the moon, that the caveman or the Neanderthal or whoever it was who lit the first fire by scraping or hitting two pieces of flint or rock together was an idiot. He wasn't an idiot. He was a scientist. He was trying to make fire. So he didn't have the extensive knowledge that we have today. He didn't have the tools that we have today. And yet, he had the same curiosity that we have today. He wanted to make his life better. He wanted himself to be protected from the elements, from the cold, the rain, to be protected from wild animals. And so, that led him to seek out fire. And by some chance, by some accident, which was necessarily the product, well, not necessarily, but probably the product of the seeking, he discovered that when he rubs two pieces of flint together, they produce a spark, and that spark can produce a fire. That brain which discovered fire is what we have come from. And the modern brain, your brain, my brain, is the result of that archaic old brain evolving over the centuries. Just like in our modern age, we now have vehicles that run on electricity and, battery operated cars and bikes and all of that. And we say it's a great thing. It's wonderful. Why? Because there's less pollution that way. Lower carbon emissions. Well, to start with, there was the bullock cart. To start with, there was the horse-driven carriage. And then you improvised on that, you improved on that. And then we had the first car, which was driven on fuel, which ran on fuel, and then we went from petrol to diesel, and then we went from that to electricity and battery operated vehicles which do not pollute. But had that very first bullock cart not been invented, nobody would have been able to improve on that. You cannot improve on something that does not exist. So because the bullock cart existed, we were able to improve on that. And so today we have aeroplanes. And a curiosity about the natural world. How does a bird fly? What are the aerodynamic principles that make this possible? Of course, in ancient times, they didn't have such words like aerodynamic. We have it now. Language also has developed through the millennia. So, but the curiosity is the same, the same curiosity that one feels now when one sees a bird flying, and well, that bird flies like that. The eagle has broader wings. The kite has more slender wings. The gull has more slender wings still. But how does the shape of their wings affect the way in which they fly? Why does this bird flap its wings so many times, and why does that bird flap its wings only so few times? So these are all queries that come to our minds when we observe the natural world, and these are exactly the same queries which came to the first inventors in civilization, the first people to discover little things, like that first fire, or the first tool, stone tools, and then when metals were discovered, metallic tools, and vessels, earthen vessels, bronze vessels, copper vessels. The human mind has always been a curious mind, and a mind that seeks something better. We always seek to enhance our existence. And in psychology, we call this the self-actualizing tendency. And we're all guided by this self-actualizing tendency. We're always drawn to do things which will contribute to our sense of self-development, which will contribute to our survival as individuals and as species. Now, let's come to religion. Religion, well, at least if you look at the ancient Vedic religion, if you look at Hinduism, of course, is a more modern term for Sanatana Dharma, which is, Sanatana means eternal. Sanatana Dharma means principle. So Sanatana Dharma essentially means eternal principles. Now, what are these eternal principles? Now, if you look at the scriptures which are present in the Vedic religions, you will find the Vedas, you will find the Upanishads, you will find the Puranas, you will find the Itihasas. So these are all different scriptural texts. And these scriptural texts are not only chronicles of societies of the period in which they were composed, but they are also chronicles of the various developments in various fields of life made by man. So all scriptures are in a sense historical. Now, a lot of scripture is said to be poetic in nature, is said to be a poetic creation, but that doesn't mean it is not real or does not reflect reality of its time. Because a poet is a person who reflects what he perceives in his surroundings. He reflects what he sees in the society he lives in. He reflects what he sees in the people that he interacts with. So a poet is really a mirror. And so even if great texts like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are called Mahakavyas, means great epic poems, that doesn't mean that they are devoid of fact or devoid of truth. Because whoever composed those epic poems was drawing inspiration from the world he lived in, from the society he lived in, from the people he interacted with and saw around him or her. Might have been a woman. I'm not going to get into that dialogue here. But the bottom line is that religion is essentially a history of humankind, and it has its own value. Religious texts have their own value because they chronicle a lot of historical developments and facts. Not all of those facts may be verifiable. Not all of those facts may be absolutely true, but definitely they are based on some experience that the chronicler has either come across by direct experience, through direct experience, or through interaction with his society. So these stories are not just stories. These myths are not just baseless lies. There was a book which is called Myth Equals Mithya. Mithya means lie. I beg to differ. A myth is not a lie. It may not be a fact, but it could be true, and it is true in the sense that it is based on something that has been observed by someone in some society. So this is very important. It may not be a fact, but it may still be a truth. It may still be true in some way, right? And well, religious practices now, I think it's got to do a lot with community. Just like you have the scientific community, a group of people who see the world in a certain way, or a group of people who investigate the natural world in a certain way. When they come together, they feel good about it. They learn from each other. They exchange ideas. They grow together. They enjoy each other's company. It stimulates them. Well, in exactly the same way, when a group of religious people meet, they are also excited to learn from each other, to listen to each other, to listen to the stories that they have to tell, to listen to the experiences that they've had. Now, there is a dimension, and to experience that feeling of community. And I think that's a big part of religion. Before there was formal scientific education, and before there was formal, there were formal scientific bodies and so on and so forth. Because our religious texts also have scientific explorations into the brain, into the body, into physiognomy, into astronomy. They're all present in our religious texts, in our Vedic texts. So like I said, I think religious texts are mostly historical in nature, and they chronicle truths about times past. Now, science has its benefits, as does belief. Now, this is a big thing. Now, this is the big difference between religion and science, that religion is based on belief and science is based on evidence. Well, there is enough scientific evidence to show that beliefs can contribute to a person's well-being. There are beliefs that contribute to a person's well-being, wellness, wholeness, and there are beliefs that contradict a person's wellness. there is scientific evidence for both of these, right? Now, what is that point at? That tells us that certain beliefs, if they contribute to a person's well-being, that's perfectly fine. If it makes a person feel good about himself or herself or his or her community or his or her life, that's great. As long as that belief does not create any suffering either in the individual or in the community or the world at large, right? Now, here is one major difference between science and religion, in that science generally looks for universal principles, principles that are universally true and universally accurate and applicable. But of course, science also examines things that are not universal in nature, because not all things can be generalized and universalized in that manner, right? We live in a world that is so vast and so filled with variety and possibility that it's impossible to really, you know, universalize anything, generalize anything. Some general principles may be there. Now, when it comes to religion, people say that religion is entirely subjective, what an individual feels. That too may not be true. That too may have these two sides to it, which is part of it is a person's individual belief in a religious order, in a religious way of life, in a deity, and part of it may again allude to universal isms, just like science and its universalisms like gravity. Okay, so religion may also have certain universal principles, just like science, and religion may also have certain specific limited principles which are applicable in specific circles, in specific places, you know. And I think most religions have evolved out of the cultures that they were formulated in. So, you know, every religion has its own diet. So you have the monks who live in Tibet, who live on, the butter which is produced from yaks, the fat of the yaks. They consume that butter, and they consume barley, both of which are very nourishing for them, and also keeps them warm. The tea that they make from that butter, yak butter, is extremely warming, heating. So in Kashmir they have saffron. Saffron has a lot of heating properties, and it's very good in that sort of a climate. And so you might have religious practices in which, in these regions, which may involve the drinking of that yak, the tea made out of yak fat, or you may have practices that involve the consumption of saffron in a place like Kashmir. On the other hand, in the African subcontinent, you might have a religious practice which involves the partaking of the flesh of a bull, or a cow, or whatever. We're talking about the African deserts or something, where where there's very little vegetation, where the only food they can get is perhaps meat of an animal. And so they do with that, they live with that, they do with what they have, and they build a community out of that, and they build certain sacred practices out of that, and so they eat the meat of an animal in Africa. Now, I can't condemn that, because that is what they've been given, and that is what they've been born into, and that is what they've had. So they've tried to make a better life with the resources that they had there. Just like people living in other parts of the world have used the resources that they had at hand, right?